Hello, my lovelies. Today, we're talking about mediocrity, exceptionalism, judgment, and more. I feel like this is a great extension of last week's episode about kindness and compassion in these tough times. You'll find the link for that show in the show notes because it applies to so many people. The inspiration for this episode comes from a post I saw from a friend, which I'm paraphrasing to keep their identity private. The post said, "I am often frustrated by my own mediocrity. Jack of all trades, master of none." And it bothered me because I consider this person anything but mediocre. They're an artist who paints beautifully. They're a writer who's honest and forthright in their essays and poems. They've raised a child they're extremely proud of. They're retired military and they've lived outside the US because of it. To me, that's not someone I would consider mediocre. And I think their frustration with their self-described mediocrity comes from admiring great artists like Georgia O'Keeffe. So I decided it was time to talk about this because I know so many people, myself included, that often diminish what we're good at because we're not masters at the things that we do. Ew. Seriously, friends, after 60 years on this planet, I've seen masters of so many things, and rarely, very rarely, are their lives really good. Instead, they have this one thing that they're amazing at, but they or their life is often a horrible mess or they're horrible people. We'll talk about that in a bit, but first, I found out something fascinating while researching this quote's origins. The idiom Jack of all trades, master of none originates from Elizabethan English. It was used by Robert Greene, a popular author at the time, in his 1592 booklet, Greene's Groat's Worth of Wit, where he debatably refers to William Shakespeare as just that, a jack of all trades and master of none. Isn't that a scream? This man, Robert Greene, who most people outside of literary circles or certain parts of the world probably have never heard of, essentially called a man who is almost universally deemed a genius writer as a hack. What's even better? His quote is a either unintentional or intentional misquote of Shakespeare himself. The full quote, which I'd never heard until I started researching this episode, is, "A jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than the master of one." Isn't that fabulous? I don't know if this is the absolute truth because, the internet, but honestly, this delights me. You know what else delights me? The fact that there were so many articles on the blessings of being a jack of all trades. And I encountered this all through my research. What so many of these articles talked about is that a jack of all trades makes you as valuable as a master because while a master can do one thing extraordinarily well, a generalist is adaptable and deals better with change, which to me is an extraordinary thing in itself. In fact, it's how every species survives. Those that resist evolution die out. Why is that important? Because when I looked up the meaning of mediocre, I found out that mediocre means average. But sadly, it's used as a pejorative with very negative connotations. It's used to describe things and people that don't measure up to someone else's expectations, and then they judge that thing as mediocre. Ugh. So anyway, I found out that mediocre comes from the Latin word mediocris, which means middling, ordinary, unremarkable. And in truth, I've never met a person that I find unremarkable. I've had experiences that were mediocre for me, but guess what? Others have found them extraordinary. So go figure. This reminds me of like my worst first date that I ever had. I was in high school and the guy was super cute, really liked him. We went to the movies and saw the movie Brubaker with Robert Redford. He loved it. I hated it. I mean, for me, the best part of the movie was the fact that Robert Redford was in it. Other than that, I could have lived my entire life without seeing that movie. We ended up in this disagreement about whether it was great or whether it wasn't, and we never went out again. So he was a friend of my best friend's husband, and they weren't married at the time, but this was, a long time ago. But so I saw this guy again, and we never didn't like each other or whatever, but it threw a wet blanket on whatever might have been and just kind of ended things before it even started. Now, the good news is that my worst first date was merely mediocre, at least by my standards. As a side note, in a Collider article ranking Robert Redford's top 25 movies, he's made 48, by the way, Brubaker ranked 21st. So maybe that movie is less than mediocre, but I would bet money that Redford doesn't regret making it. So mediocrity isn't always a terrible thing, right? So the other thing I want to say, though, is before anybody comes for me, I want to state that I am absolutely not saying we don't need specialists and masters in this world. I, for one, definitely want a specialist or a master if anyone in my family needs an operation. I prefer experts guiding me in my financial matters. In some instances, those masters are exactly what we need. But do we need it to live a wonderful life? Well, I say no. In one of my previous podcasts, I referenced a quote by author Steve Brown, who said, "Anything worth doing is worth doing poorly until you learn to do it well." And I love this quote because it turns you toward acceptance and improvement rather than judgment. And we're all so good at judgment, aren't we? We all know about Michelangelo's David in the Sistine Chapel. But did you know that Michelangelo was also a poet? And he was the architect who oversaw the construction of St. Peter's Basilica? Even those who study art, including my own children, aren't familiar with Michelangelo's poetry. For Michelangelo, life was a creative endeavor, and sometimes he failed. In an article from the History Channel, I found out that Michelangelo was the architect for fortifications for the city of Florence when they expelled the ruling Medici family and installed a Republican government. This could have cost Michelangelo his life because the Pope at the time was from the Medici family and he was Michelangelo's benefactor. But after the papal forces retook the city of Florence, he forgave Michelangelo and actually rehired him. When that Pope died, however, Michelangelo fled to Rome, never to return to his native city. So even the masters mess up, sometimes big time. I mean, we all know about Vincent van Gogh, don't we? He left behind some extraordinary work, but at what cost? His life and health, both physically and mentally, was damaged terribly by him becoming a master. And again, I'm not saying every master ends up this way, but entirely too many of them do. And we forget that part about their lives. Outside of the art world, I think we would all agree that Albert Einstein was a genius and a master academic. But he was an awful human being. He constantly cheated on and belittled his wife. He refused to credit her in his work for work she had done to help him do his work. And he literally brought his mistresses into the home they shared. Ew. And as if to bring the point home fully, I often listen to music as I work on my podcast because it helps drown out the noises that can distract me from my work. And while working on this part of the podcast, the song released after Jimmy Buffett's passing came on. The name of the song is Bubbles Up. And if you haven't heard it, Let me share a few lines from it. This is part of the chorus. It says, bubbles up. They will point us toward home, no matter how deep or how far we roam. They will show you the surface, the plot, and the purpose. So when the journey gets long, just know that you're loved. There's a light up above. And joy, there's always enough. Bubbles up. Those lyrics are a great reminder that it isn't about mastery for most of us, including Jimmy Buffett. It's about something very different. And when I learned what this song means, I think it's a great metaphor for life. For those who are familiar with diving, I know this is probably common knowledge, but for people like me who are not familiar with it, I think the story's fascinating. Sometimes when you dive, especially when it's dark, it's easy to lose your perspective and not know if you're swimming up or down. And people often panic, but there's an easy solution. You relax and look at which way the bubbles are going. The bubbles travel up. So that's how you know what up is. So what does this have to do with anything? If you're new here, just know I'm a recovering perfectionist and self-criticizer. And I'm in a much better place than where I was before. Too many of us hold ourselves to the most ridiculous standards and blame ourselves for things we have zero control over. And no matter what we do, it's never enough. That is a recipe for a life of less than. And none of us deserve that. Sometimes we need to relax and figure out which way the bubbles are going, so we do know which way is up and we can move toward the light. Recently a friend of mine lost her dad. And the day after he passed, she was feeling bad because she couldn't bring herself to get off the couch. And that broke my heart because here was this woman who loved her dad, who is no longer here. And she was worried about taking care of her home. And so I asked her to please be kind to my friend and treat her like she would a dear friend who lost their parent. And that's kind of the message I want to share with all of you today. It's time to cut yourself some slack, or maybe a lot of slack. I've never judged anyone for the condition of their baseboards when I visited them. That said, when I have company coming, I do spend a bit of time cleaning up, but not like I used to. There was a time I cleaned for days when guests were coming, and I felt awful if there were even crumbs on the floor. And honestly, only one person ever criticized me about the condition of my house, among other things that they criticized me for, and that person is no longer in my life. The thing is, so many of us have this voice in our head that yells at us or scolds us or humiliates us whenever we don't live up to a certain standard. But whose standard is that? Often it's from a parent who lived in completely different circumstances than we do. But we still hear that voice. And it's rarely kind. I have seen women in particular, though men do it too, I've seen them turn themselves inside out to live up to the most ridiculous standards. And it's heartbreaking because while we/they are doing that, we're missing out on the best moments in life. I remember talking to a fellow blogger once, and I asked her who her target audience was, and she said a hot mess mom. When I asked her why, she said that she thought she could help them get their home and lives organized. There was another woman on the video call who is a self-described hot mess mom who embraces the chaos of her life and has a blast in the process. So I proposed to the first woman. I proposed this to her. I said, when you're vacuuming and you get all of the lines running perfectly parallel in your living room and how good that feels? And she got this look on her face of such satisfaction. And she was like, yes. And at the same time, the hot mess mom was looking at me like, what are you talking about? And so I asked her, have you ever even thought of doing that with the vacuum? And the answer was obviously no. But here's the thing. For the first woman, that kind of thing brought her joy. If the second woman tried to live up to that, she'd be miserable. On the flip side of that coin, I asked the first woman if her children told her that there were hot air balloons going over the house while she was in the middle of making dinner, and they wanted her to come outside and see them. What would she do? And she said, well, I'd have to tell them that I couldn't do that because I was making dinner. So I asked the other woman, what would you do? Even if you needed to be somewhere and you knew you would either be late or you would have to make other plans for dinner. And she was like, we're watching balloons. And I can always hit a drive-through. So here's these two different women. And if either of them tried to live up to the other one's standards, they would never be successful. And that's the thing about life. It's meant to be lived to your standards. Don't know what those are? That's where I come in. You see, I truly believe everyone is spectacular in some way, and no one is mediocre unless they truly choose to be. And if you've been around for any amount of time, you know that now we're going to talk about personalities a bit and how this all fits in with them. For the driven personality, you're the one personality I'm going to give a bit of grace here because you love overcoming challenges, but your idea of mastery is different than others. You figure if you can do it, you've mastered it. Unless you possess some of the C personality, in which case you will chase something until you master it. In truth, you need challenges or you're going to self-destruct. But you also like being in control, so others' voices can get drowned out by your own when you're chasing mastery. But it's important to know that unless you're dealing with another driven personality, you can become that ugly voice in someone else's head because they don't process like you do. It's a fine line you walk between pushing yourself and others to be their best and crushing people's spirits. And I know you rarely intend to do such a thing. You want to master everything you do, which is awesome. But I encourage you to think about being in happy, healthy relationships as something that is as important as achieving your very high goals, so that you don't look back someday and see a path of carnage. Instead, you look back at a life of achievement, willingly surrounded by the people you care about most in the world. That, my friend, is priceless. For the inspired person, because of your fun-loving ways, you probably have a voice in your head that tells you to get serious, especially when you're being lighthearted at the, in air quotes, wrong moment. And I put that in air quotes because as a person, an I person myself, at some point, you realize that all the rules are made up and that you don't have to follow any of them, but you do sometimes to keep the peace. So case in point, my mother survived a brain aneurysm in 1999. But when she woke up, she thought my brother was her brother. His name was Artie. And that I was somebody named Debbie. So my brother and I started calling each other Artie and Debbie privately, and we'd laugh about it. My uncle, the one actually named Artie, who she did recognize as her brother, she thought my brother was her brother, but a younger version because, injured brains do weird things. So anyway, Uncle Artie was not happy with us because he thought we were making fun of our mother who was impaired. And, he got pretty upset with us. And the thing was, the surgeon had told us that was a definite possibility that she may never recognize us again. And the truth is that the I personality often deals with extremely difficult emotional situations with humor, especially around other people, because they don't want to bring anybody else down. And this may sound wildly inappropriate to other people, but it's often how the inspired personality keeps the ugly voices at bay. Because despite what people may think, the happy-go-lucky inspired person is extremely susceptible to the ugly voices of those they respect and look up to. So please be gentle with their fun-loving spirit. My uncle wasn't. We survived. We're okay. And we were not being disrespectful to our mother. We were literally trying to deal with our own trauma and grief. And if you are an inspired personality with that ugly voice in your head, honestly, we need to talk, because if I can get rid of my ugly voice, I know you can too. The supportive person is as susceptible as the inspired personality to other critical voices, which they often incorporate into their own head. And it takes a village of people to upend those critical voices, because the supportive person will try to change who and how they are to make others feel comfortable. Other personality types can easily take advantage of that, especially if they catch the supportive personality in an unbalanced time. But when you manipulate a supportive personality like that, it destroys what makes them extraordinary. You take away the S personality's ability to support people without guilt or shame. That makes them mediocre, because they start to question their own motives. And if you are a supportive person, you are the most likely to excuse that abusive behavior in others, because you truly want to support them, even and maybe most especially when they're not being kind. You know that's a cry for help. But unless that person is willing to receive the amazing support and love you have to give, you will exhaust both of you by trying. You are much better served to learn how to create simple boundaries by listening to your intuition and pouring yourself into people who truly appreciate you. That doesn't mean you have to shun the others. It merely means learning to discern how to give support without giving too much of yourself away. That way, you have plenty left over for those who truly want and need your amazing gifts. To the cautious personality, you excel at holding your boundaries. And as long as that doesn't tip over into rigidity, you'll do well in nearly everything you do. And that is a recipe for mastery of all kinds. Your challenge, like the driven person, is realizing that while you are masterfully talented in many things, you can also end up looking back at your very accomplished life and wondering what it was all for, because there's no one to celebrate your achievements with you. One of my favorite C people once said to me, "It's not that I don't like people, but I need to get my work done first." And this is the point that I love to remind C personalities of. I know you're all nodding your heads right now when I said that it's not that I don't like people, I just need to get my work done first. But you need to decide a cutoff point and realize that you can go nonstop until you exhaust yourself to get your work done. Please make sure that you work in some people time so that you have someone to celebrate your incredible accomplishments with. I promise you won't regret it. I remember once asking a woman I admired to take on a role in my brother-in-law's campaign when he was running for Congress. She took a deep breath and said no, because she was doing less volunteer work so that she could spend more time with her family. I said, okay, and I appreciated her honesty. And we both went about our business. A few weeks later, we ran into each other, and she told me that I was the first person she had said no to in over 5 years by choice. There had been circumstances where she had to say no, but this was by choice. And she truly appreciated that I hadn't gotten angry with her. And I love knowing that I made it easier for her to say no and focus on her family, which was far more important than what I was asking her to do. To me, that's a great accomplishment for that C personality woman. Speaking of incredible accomplishments, the Happiest Holidays Bundle and Community Upgrade is on sale right now. The bundle's live from November 8th through the 15th of 2023. It features some of the most amazing women who will be helping other women have their best holiday season possible. So when you go to look at this thing, because you need to go look at this thing, be sure to upgrade to the community option, because there is going to be an opportunity to get one-on-one help and to hang out with some of the coolest people I know. And I know because I'm the one who picked them. Anyway, to learn more about that, just head over to the Moving Toward Better website, click the button in the upper right-hand corner or click the link in the show notes. I am so excited to help you have the best holiday season possible. And so are the women who have added value to this bundle. Grab yours today and get started. It is going to be awesome. So until next time, keep moving toward better and shining your light as brightly as you can. Love you all. At Moving Toward Better, it's our mission to help you unlock a fantastic life, powered by what's unique and authentically you. To learn how we can help you in your quest, head over to movingtowardbetter.com to check it out, or use the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, thanks for being you, and have a great day. Love you all.